I remember the exact moment the lottery numbers flashed across my tiny kitchen screen in Queens, New York. 50 million mine. And still, I said nothing. Because by then, I was already broken. My own son and his wife had been planning my end, celebrating like I was already gone, treating me like a forgotten ghost. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. Every morning, I wake up to the same dull ache in my chest. The silence of my cold apartment wraps around me like a shroud. My coffee mug, stained with years of bitter mornings, sits on the window ledge overlooking rusted fire escapes and the endless hustle of Astoria Boulevard. The city breathes outside my window. But inside, everything feels dead. I shuffle through old photo albums sometimes. Yellowed pictures of a family that once loved me fiercely. Or at least, I thought they did. Now those photographs feel like relics from someone else's life. A woman who smiled without forcing it. A mother who believed her sacrifices mattered. Last Tuesday, I sent my son Michael a simple text message. Just hoping. Always hoping. Would you like to have dinner this weekend? I could make your favorite pot roast. The screen showed it was delivered. He read it. I saw those two little check marks turn blue. But no reply came. I sat there staring at my phone for 3 hours. 3 hours of waiting for 3 words. Sure, Mom, Saturday. But nothing. The silence cut deeper than any argument we'd ever had. I imagined them at their house in Bayside. The smell of takeout Chinese food filling their renovated kitchen while they scrolled through real estate websites calculating, planning, waiting. You see, I've been sick. Not dying, mind you. But sick enough that they've been circling like vultures. Diabetes, high blood pressure, arthritis that makes my hands ache when it rains. To them, these aren't health problems. They're dollar signs on a countdown timer. The lottery ticket was an impulse buy. $5 at the bodega on Northern Boulevard where Mr. Kim always asks about my day. $5 that changed everything, but not in the way you'd expect. When those numbers matched, when I realized I was holding $50 million in my trembling hands, my first thought wasn't joy. It wasn't excitement. It was this. Now I'll know who really loves me. So I said nothing. I folded that ticket and put it in my jewelry box next to my wedding ring from Harold. My Harold, who died 7 years ago and left me more alone than I'd ever imagined possible. The ticket sat there like a secret test, waiting. The very next day, Michael called. Not to ask about dinner, not to check on my health, to ask about my will. Mom, have you updated your paperwork lately? Sarah and I were talking, and with your health issues, maybe it's time to be practical. Practical. That's what they called my death now. A practical matter to be handled efficiently. I gave everything to raise that boy. Everything. When his father walked out on us when Michael was 12, I worked 3 jobs to keep us in our little apartment in Woodside. I cleaned offices at night, served lunch at the school cafeteria during the day, and took in sewing on weekends. My fingers bled from needle pricks. My back ached from mopping floors, but I never complained. When Michael got accepted to Columbia, I was so proud. I sold my mother's engagement ring to help pay his tuition. The ring Harold had proposed with, I sold that too. Piece by piece, I gave away everything that had meaning to afford his future. Education is the best investment, I told myself as I handed over check after check. $23,000 for his first year, $26,000 for his second. By the time he graduated, I had emptied my retirement fund and taken out a second mortgage on the apartment Harold and I had worked so hard to buy. But I was happy to do it. That's what mothers do, right? We sacrifice. We give. We put our children's dreams before our own survival. I thought that's what love looked like. Michael met Sarah in his senior year. A beautiful girl from Manhattan with parents who owned investment properties and vacation homes in the Hamptons. The first time she came to dinner, I watched her eyes scan our small apartment, taking inventory. The outdated furniture, the cracked linoleum in the kitchen, the way I served dinner on mismatched plates because I'd never been able to afford a proper set. She smiled at me that night. But it wasn't warmth I saw in her eyes. It was calculation. They married 2 years later in an expensive ceremony in Long Island that cost more than I'd made in 5 years. I wasn't asked to contribute financially, which was a relief since I had nothing left to give. But I wasn't asked to help plan it either. I was treated like a guest at my own son's wedding. A poor relative to be seated in the back and acknowledged politely, but not included in anything that mattered. The apartment they bought in Bayside cost $700,000. Michael had a good job with an investment firm, but not that good. Sarah's parents helped with the down payment, and I suspect they made sure I knew it. Every time I visited, Sarah would mention something new. Oh, my parents surprised us with this dining room set. Isn't it lovely? It's from Italy. I would nod and smile, sitting on their expensive sofa, drinking coffee from their matching china cups, feeling smaller and smaller with each visit. But I kept giving. When their first baby came, little Emma, I spent my weekends babysitting, not because they asked, but because I offered. I wanted to be useful. I wanted to matter. I bought diapers when they mentioned running low. I brought groceries when Sarah complained about the cost of organic produce. When they bought their second car, a luxury SUV, Michael mentioned they were stretching their budget. Without thinking, I offered to help. $2,000 from what remained of my Social Security. It's a loan, I told myself. But we all knew it wasn't. Loans get paid back. Years passed. Emma started school. They had a second child, Thomas. My grandchildren knew me as the grandmother who brought gifts they didn't particularly want and food they didn't particularly need. I was the one who babysat when their real babysitter canceled. The backup plan, the safety net. I never complained. I smiled when Michael would call only when he needed something. I pretended not to notice when Sarah would check her phone while I was talking, clearly bored by whatever story I was telling about my day or my health or my loneliness. When Harold died, they came to the funeral. Sarah wore black and looked appropriately solemn. Michael gave a nice eulogy about his stepfather. But 3 days later, when I was sitting alone in our empty apartment wondering how I'd fill the silence, they didn't call. They didn't visit. They didn't check if I needed anything. I called them. "I'm having trouble sleeping," I said. "The apartment feels so empty. Maybe I could come stay with you for a few days, just until I adjust?" "Oh, Mom," Michael said, and I could hear Sarah in the background, probably shaking her head. "We're really swamped right now. Emma has soccer practice and Sarah's got that charity event. Maybe next month?" Next month never came. That's when the small cruelties began. The forgotten birthday. The Christmas invitation that arrived 2 days after Christmas. The medical appointments I attended alone, sitting in waiting rooms full of other elderly people with their concerned children beside them, while I held my own hand. I started to notice other things. How conversations stopped when I entered rooms. How Sarah would whisper to Michael when they thought I wasn't listening. How they'd exchange glances when I mentioned feeling tired or confused or forgetful. I wasn't imagining it. They were waiting for me to die. The first time I overheard them discussing my finances, I was in their kitchen making coffee while they sat in the living room with papers spread across their coffee table. Tax documents, bank statements, a life insurance policy I'd forgotten I had. "She's got the apartment," Sarah was saying. "That's worth at least $400,000 now, maybe more with the market, plus whatever's in her savings." "Not much in savings," Michael replied. "She gave most of it away, helping us over the years. But the apartment's fully paid off. And there's the Social Security. What about long-term care? If she gets sick, really sick, that could eat up everything. That's why we need to plan ahead. Maybe convince her to add my name to the deed. You know, just in case." I stood frozen by their refrigerator, coffee mug trembling in my hands. They were planning my future like I was already gone, like I was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. But the worst part wasn't what they were saying. It was how they were saying it. Matter-of-factly, like discussing the weather or what to have for dinner. My entire life reduced to numbers on a spreadsheet. That night, I went home and sat in Harold's chair, staring at the walls we'd painted together 30 years ago, the furniture we'd saved to buy, the life we'd built that was now being appraised like merchandise at an estate sale. I started paying attention after that, really paying attention, to the way Michael would steer conversations toward my health, asking detailed questions about my medications and doctor visits, to how Sarah would comment on how challenging it must be for me to manage such a big apartment alone, to how they'd both suggest I might be happier in a senior living community. They never said the words nursing home, but that's what they meant. Somewhere they could put me where I'd be someone else's responsibility, where the apartment could be sold and the money could find its way into their investment portfolio. The medical scares started small. A dizzy spell at the grocery store. A confusion about dates that made me miss a doctor's appointment. Normal things that happen when you're 73 years old and living alone. But Michael and Sarah treated each incident like a crisis that required their intervention. "Mom, you really scared us," Michael would say after some minor episode. "Maybe it's time to think about getting more help, or finding somewhere with more support." Support. Another word that meant, give up your independence so we can take your assets. I began to understand something that broke my heart. My son didn't love me anymore. Maybe he never had. Not the way I loved him. I had been useful to him, a resource to be exploited. And now that I was old and sick and had given away most of what I had to give, I had become a burden to be managed. The night I bought the lottery ticket, I had spent the evening alone again on what should have been Emma's birthday celebration. They'd had a party. A big one, from what I could see on Sarah's social media. Dozens of children, decorations, an elaborate cake, but I hadn't been invited. When I called to wish Emma happy birthday, she'd answered the phone in the middle of the party noise. "Oh, hi, Grandma. Thanks for calling. Mom, it's Grandma." And then Sarah's voice, clearly annoyed. "Emma, go play with your friends. We'll call Grandma back later." They never called back. I walked to Mr. Kim's bodega that night because I couldn't stand being in my apartment another minute. The walls felt like they were closing in. I bought milk I didn't need and bread that would probably go stale before I finished it because I rarely eat anymore. And on impulse, I bought 5 lottery tickets. "Feeling lucky tonight, Mrs. Martinez?" Mr. Kim asked with his kind smile. "Something like that," I said. When I got home, I put 4 of the tickets in my kitchen drawer and kept one in my purse. The next morning, I forgot about them entirely. I was too focused on waiting for Michael to call me back about the dinner invitation that would never come. It wasn't until Saturday evening, 3 days later, that I remembered the tickets. The numbers were being announced on the small television in my kitchen while I heated up leftover soup. I wasn't really watching, just having the sound for company, when I heard the announcer say something about a $50 million jackpot. $50 million. I laughed to myself, thinking about what I could do with that kind of money. Travel, maybe. See Paris like Harold and I always planned. Buy a house with a garden, help my grandchildren with college without bankrupting myself. Then, almost as a joke to myself, I pulled out the ticket from my purse. I figured I'd check the numbers and have a good laugh about my 47 cents of hope before throwing it away. The first number matched. "Well, that's something," I said to my empty kitchen. The second number matched. My hands started to shake a little. The third number, the fourth, the fifth, and then the sixth. I stared at that ticket for a full minute before I understood what I was seeing. Every single number matched. I had won $50 million. My first instinct was to call Michael, to scream with joy and share this impossible news. My son would be so excited. We could pay off his mortgage. Thomas and Emma could go to any college they wanted. We could travel together, take family vacations, be a real family again. I actually picked up the phone. I started to dial his number, and then I stopped. If I called Michael right now, what would happen? He'd race over here with Sarah. They'd hug me and cry and tell me how happy they were for me. They'd help me claim the money and manage it properly because, after all, $50 million is too much for an old woman to handle alone. They'd set up trusts and accounts and investment strategies. And then what? Would they love me more? Or would they just find better ways to hide the fact that they didn't? I put the phone down. I folded the ticket carefully and placed it in my jewelry box next to Harold's wedding ring and my mother's pearl earrings, the only valuable things I had left that Michael and Sarah hadn't found a reason for me to sell or give away. Then I sat down and waited. I wanted to see what would happen if they thought I was still the same broke, sick old woman they'd been planning around. I didn't have to wait long. The very next day, Michael called, but not to invite me anywhere or ask about my health or tell me about his children's lives. He called about practical matters. "Mom, Sarah and I have been talking. With your health issues and everything, we think it might be time to update your will and maybe look into power of attorney arrangements. You know, just in case. Just in case." "In case of what? In case I died and made things inconvenient for them?" "What kind of arrangements?" I asked, though I already knew. "Well, someone needs to be able to make decisions if you can't. Medical decisions, financial decisions. And your will hasn't been updated since Dad died. A lot has changed since then. A lot had changed. I had given away most of my money helping them. I had become isolated and dependent. I had learned that my son was counting on my death to improve his financial situation. "I'll think about it," I said. "Mom, please don't put this off. It's important." Sarah found a good elder law attorney. We could all go together next week. Sarah found an attorney. Of course she did. Sarah, who had never shown the slightest interest in my welfare, had suddenly become concerned about my legal arrangements. I said, "I'll think about it, Michael." "Fine, but don't wait too long. At your age, you never know what might happen. At your age, you never know what might happen." My son was reminding me of my mortality, not out of concern, but as motivation to sign papers that would benefit him. After I hung up, I sat in Harold's chair and thought about the ticket in my jewelry box. $50 million. Enough money to change everything. Enough money to buy back my son's love, maybe. Or enough money to prove once and for all that love was never really there. I decided to keep waiting. Over the following weeks, the pressure intensified. Michael called more frequently, always with the same message disguised in different words. Time was running out. I needed to be practical. They only wanted to help. Sarah started calling too, using a voice sweet as honey but with an edge that cut like glass. I know these things are uncomfortable to think about, but we love you so much. We just want to make sure you're protected. Protected from what? From having control over my own life? Then came the medical appointments. Suddenly, they were both very interested in my health. Michael insisted on driving me to my doctor visits, sitting in the waiting room with me, coming into the examination room to ask detailed questions about my condition. "Dr. Rodriguez," he would say, "my mother seems to be having more confusion lately, forgetting things, getting dates mixed up. Is this something we should be concerned about?" Dr. Rodriguez, who had been my physician for 15 years and knew me well, would look confused. "Mrs. Martinez seems fine to me. These are very normal age-related changes." But Michael wasn't satisfied with that answer. "What about her living situation? Is it safe for her to be alone in that apartment? If she fell or had an emergency, who would know?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that I had been living alone just fine since his father died, that I was managing my medications and my appointments and my daily life without any help from him, that the only confusion I was experiencing was trying to understand when my son had become my enemy, but I said nothing. I wanted to see how far they would go. The answer came sooner than I expected. 3 weeks after I won the lottery, I found Michael in my apartment when I came back from the pharmacy. He was sitting at my kitchen table with papers spread in front of him. He had used the emergency key I'd given him years ago, the one that was supposed to be for actual emergencies. "Mom, there you are. I was worried when you didn't answer the phone. I was picking up my prescriptions. I told you I would be out." "Did you? I don't remember you mentioning that." He didn't remember because I hadn't told him, but he was planting the seed that maybe I was confused. Maybe I was forgetting conversations that never happened. "What are you doing here, Michael?" "I brought the paperwork we talked about. The will update and the power of attorney forms. I thought we could go through them together. Sarah's meeting with the attorney tomorrow, and she can take them with her." Sarah was meeting with the attorney, not me. Sarah was handling my legal affairs while I was apparently too confused to be trusted with my own papers. I looked at the documents on my table. Forms that would give Michael control over my finances and medical decisions. Forms that would make him the executor of my estate and the beneficiary of my life insurance. Forms that would essentially make me a child in my own life while making him rich when I died. "I'm not signing anything today," I said. His face changed. The pretense of concern dropped for just a moment, and I saw something ugly underneath. Impatience. Anger. Calculation. "Mom, please be reasonable. This is for your own good. What if something happens to you? What if you have another dizzy spell and fall? What if you forget to take your medication and end up in the hospital? Someone needs to be able to make decisions." Someone. He meant himself. I said, "No, Michael. Please take your papers and go." "Fine, but this is a mistake. A big mistake. And when something happens, don't expect me to clean up the mess." After he left, I double-locked my door and changed the code on my phone. Then I took the lottery ticket out of my jewelry box and held it in my shaking hands. $50 million. And my son was treating me like a pauper who needed to sign away her rights for his convenience. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called my neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez. Carmen Rodriguez, who lived in the apartment next door and had become my closest friend over the past few years. Carmen, who was 78 and had raised 6 children alone after her husband died in Vietnam. Carmen, who understood the difference between being independent and being abandoned. "Mija," she said when she answered the phone, "I was just thinking about you. Come over. I made too much arroz con pollo." We sat in her kitchen, which was nearly identical to mine, but somehow warmer. Maybe it was the plants on her windowsill or the family photos covering every surface. Maybe it was just the presence of someone who wasn't calculating my net worth while pretending to care about my welfare. I told Carmen everything. About Michael and Sarah's behavior, about the papers he wanted me to sign, about the way they talked about me like I was already dead. I didn't tell her about the lottery ticket. Not yet. "Ay, mija," Carmen said, shaking her head. "This is not love. This is something else. Something ugly. But he's my son. Being someone's son doesn't give him the right to steal their life while they're still living it." Carmen's words hit me like cold water. That's exactly what Michael was trying to do. Steal my life while I was still living it. What should I do? Fight back. You're not dead yet, Maria. Don't let them bury you while your heart is still beating. That night, I lay in bed thinking about fighting back. But how? I was one old woman against 2 younger, smarter, financially secure people who had time and resources I didn't have. They could afford lawyers and doctors who would support their narrative that I was incompetent. They could present evidence of my age, my health problems, my confusion about dates and appointments. What evidence did I have? Only the truth. And the truth was that I was tired and lonely and sick of being treated like a burden instead of a mother. The next morning, I made a decision. I was going to cash in the lottery ticket. Not to give the money away or share it or use it to buy back affection I should have had for free. I was going to use it to disappear. I took the subway into Manhattan, to the New York Lottery office on Park Avenue. The building was intimidating, all glass and steel and the kind of security that made you feel like a criminal just for walking through the doors. But I had business there. Important business. The process was more complicated than I expected. Background checks and verification and meetings with accountants and lawyers who specialized in large lottery winnings. They asked about my plans for the money, whether I had family who might contest the claim, whether I needed protection from people who might try to exploit me. I need protection from people who are already trying to exploit me, I said. The lottery officials were kind, but efficient. They arranged for the money to be paid out over 20 years, with the option to take a smaller lump sum immediately. They helped me set up accounts that couldn't be accessed by anyone else. They recommended lawyers who specialized in protecting lottery winners from family members who might suddenly become very interested in their welfare. I took the lump sum, $32 million after taxes. More money than I had ever imagined having. More money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. And I told no one. The first thing I did was secure my apartment. I had the locks changed and installed a security system. I opened new bank accounts and closed the old ones that Michael might somehow gain access to. I hired an attorney. Not the one Sarah had recommended, but one who worked exclusively for me. Then I waited to see what would happen when Michael discovered that his mother had suddenly become financially independent. He found out 2 weeks later when he tried to access my bank account to help me pay my bills. The account was closed. When he called the bank, they told him they had no record of any account under my name. He called me in a panic. "Mom, what happened to your account? The bank says it's closed." "I closed it." "Why? Where did you put your money?" "Somewhere safe." "What does that mean?" "Mom, you can't just close your bank accounts without telling someone. What if there's an emergency? What if you need help accessing your funds?" "I don't need help, Michael. I'm managing my own finances just fine." There was a long pause. I could almost hear him recalculating, trying to figure out how to regain control of a situation that was slipping away from him. "This is exactly what I've been worried about," he said finally. "This kind of erratic behavior. Closing accounts, making decisions without consulting anyone. Mom, this proves you need supervision." Supervision? That's what he called love now. "I'm supervising myself just fine. We're coming over to talk about this." "No, you're not. I'm not opening the door." "Mom." I hung up the phone. They came anyway, of course. Michael and Sarah standing outside my door for 20 minutes, knocking and calling my name. I watched them through the peephole, seeing their frustration mount as they realized I wasn't going to let them in. Finally, Sarah called through the door. "Maria, we know you're in there. We're just worried about you. Please open the door so we can talk." "Go away," I called back. "I don't want to talk. This is ridiculous," Michael said, his voice rising. "You can't just lock yourself in there and refuse to see your family. I can do whatever I want. It's my apartment and my life." They left eventually, but not before making several phone calls right outside my door. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught enough words to understand that they were calling lawyers and doctors, trying to find someone who would declare me mentally incompetent based on my refusal to cooperate with their plans. Let them try, I thought. I had my own lawyers now. Lawyers who worked for me, not for my son's financial interests. The psychological warfare began immediately. Michael started calling me every day, sometimes multiple times, asking the same questions over and over. Was I taking my medication? Was I eating properly? Did I remember our conversation from the day before? He was building a case, creating a record of my supposed confusion and forgetfulness. Every phone call was an opportunity to document my declining mental state. But I wasn't declining. If anything, I was sharper than I'd been in years. Having enough money to be truly independent had lifted a weight from my mind that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. For the first time since Harold died, I felt strong. Sarah took a different approach. She started showing up with the grandchildren, using them as emotional leverage. "Grandma, why won't you see Daddy?" Emma asked when Sarah brought her to my door one afternoon. "Daddy says you're sick and that's why you're acting strange." Through the door, I could hear Sarah coaching her. "Tell Grandma you miss her. Tell her you want to hug her." I opened the door that time. I couldn't use my grandchildren as weapons, even if their parents could. Emma looked confused when she saw me. I probably wasn't what she expected from someone who was supposed to be having a mental breakdown. "Hi, sweetie," I said, kneeling down to hug her. "I missed you too." "Are you sick, Grandma?" "No, baby, I'm feeling better than I have in a long time." Sarah's face was tight with frustration. Maria, we need to talk. This behavior has to stop. You're scaring the children. I'm not scared, Emma said helpfully. Grandma looks happy. Take Emma down to the car, Sarah told Michael. I'll be there in a minute. After they were gone, Sarah's mask came off entirely. I don't know what game you think you're playing, she said. But it ends now. You're making Michael sick with worry. You're confusing the children. This whole act of independence is ridiculous for someone your age. It's not an act. Of course it is. You're 73 years old with multiple health problems and no family support because you're pushing away everyone who tries to help you. Do you think you can take care of yourself forever? Do you think money grows on trees? If only she knew. I can take care of myself just fine. Really? When's the last time you saw a doctor? When's the last time someone checked on your medications? When's the last time you had a real meal instead of living on soup and crackers? I saw Dr. Rodriguez last week. My medications are organized in a weekly dispenser that I fill myself every Sunday, and I had a rose con pollo with Carmen last night. Sarah's mouth fell open. She hadn't expected specific answers. She'd expected the confusion and defensiveness of someone who actually was declining. Well, she said finally, we'll see how long this lasts. It was a threat, and we both knew it. After they left, I sat down and made a list of everything I needed to do to protect myself. I needed medical records that would prove my competency. I needed legal documents that would prevent them from having me declared mentally incapable. I needed a support system that didn't depend on family members who wanted to control me. I started with Dr. Rodriguez. I made an appointment and explained the situation honestly. My son and his wife were pressuring me to sign legal papers that would give them control over my finances and medical care. I needed documentation that I was mentally competent to make my own decisions. Dr. Rodriguez was shocked. But Maria, you're one of my sharpest patients. Your memory is excellent, your reasoning is clear. There's no medical basis for anyone to claim you're incompetent. Would you be willing to put that in writing? Of course. Next, I met with the lawyer the lottery office had recommended. Ellen Morrison was a small, fierce woman in her 50s who specialized in protecting elderly clients from financial exploitation by their own families. How common is this? I asked her. More common than you'd think, Ellen said. Adult children see their parents as retirement accounts rather than people. They convince themselves they're being helpful while they're actually being predatory. Ellen helped me draw up documents that would make it nearly impossible for Michael to gain control of my finances or my person. She also recommended a geriatric psychiatrist who could provide additional documentation of my mental competency if needed. But the most important thing, Ellen said, is to build a support network that isn't dependent on your family. Do you have friends, neighbors, anyone who knows you well and can testify to your normal behavior? I thought of Carmen, who saw me almost every day and knew better than anyone how capable I was of taking care of myself. Yes, I said. I do. Carmen was more than willing to help. When I told her the whole story, including the part about the lottery ticket, she laughed until she cried. Ay, Dios mío, she said. You are a rich woman and they don't know it. This is better than any telenovela. It's not funny, Carmen. They're trying to steal my life. I know, mija. But you have the power now. You just have to decide how to use it. How to use it. That was the question, wasn't it? I could reveal the money and watch Michael and Sarah suddenly become loving and attentive. I could use the wealth to force them to treat me with respect. Or I could keep the secret and see exactly who they really were when they thought I had nothing left to give. I chose to keep watching. The attacks on my competency intensified. Michael began calling my doctors directly, expressing his concerns about my mental state. He contacted the building management, asking them to keep an eye on me because I was acting erratically. He even called the police once, reporting that he was concerned about my welfare because I wasn't answering my phone. The police officer who came to do the welfare check was kind but thorough. She asked me detailed questions about my daily routine, my medications, my support system. She looked around my apartment, which was clean and organized, and spoke with Carmen, who vouched for my normalcy. Mrs. Martinez, the officer said before leaving, you seem perfectly capable of taking care of yourself, but be aware that someone is working very hard to create a record that suggests otherwise. You might want to document your own activities and conversations in case you need to defend yourself later. Document my activities. That gave me an idea. I started keeping a journal, not just of my own activities, but of every interaction with Michael and Sarah. Every phone call, every visit, every attempt to pressure me into signing papers or seeing their chosen doctors or moving into their preferred living arrangements. The pattern that emerged was clear. They weren't concerned about my welfare. They were concerned about their inheritance. Every suggestion they made would result in them gaining more control over my assets. Every doctor they recommended had financial relationships with nursing homes and assisted living facilities. Every lawyer they suggested specialized in estate planning that would benefit adult children. They were building their case methodically and professionally. But so was I. The breaking point came in November, almost 6 months after I won the lottery. Michael announced that he had found the perfect assisted living facility for me. Not a nursing home, he was careful to emphasize. A luxury senior community with activities and social opportunities and medical support. "We've already put down a deposit," he said when he called to tell me. "You can move in after Thanksgiving. That gives us time to sell the apartment and get your affairs in order." "You put down a deposit without asking me?" "Mom, we've been talking about this for months. You agreed that you needed more support." "I never agreed to anything. You said you'd think about it." We took that as a yes. They took that as a yes. They had interpreted my refusal to immediately reject their suggestion as permission to make decisions for me. "I'm not moving anywhere." "The deposit is non-refundable, Mom. It's $5,000. $5,000 they had spent without consulting me, expecting me to reimburse them or feel guilty about their loss. That's your problem. Mom, please be reasonable. Just come look at the place. It's beautiful. Much nicer than that cramped apartment." That cramped apartment. The home Harold and I had bought together, where I had raised Michael, where every corner held memories of a life well lived. They saw it as cramped. I saw it as sacred. "I'm not looking at anything. I'm staying here." "Fine. But don't expect us to keep running over there every time you have a crisis." A crisis. Like the time I had called because I couldn't get my cable box to work and they had used it as evidence that I was becoming unable to manage technology. Like the time I had mentioned feeling dizzy after taking new medication, and they had used it to argue that I needed constant supervision. "I won't," I said. "I'll handle my own crises." But they weren't done. A few days later, Sarah called with a new approach. Sweet and concerned and full of manipulation disguised as love. "Maria, I think there might be some misunderstanding between you and Michael. He loves you so much and he's only trying to help. Maybe if we all sat down together, we could work this out." "There's nothing to work out. I'm staying in my apartment and managing my own affairs." "But honey, that's just not realistic at your age. What happens when you can't climb those stairs anymore? What happens when you fall and no one finds you for days? What happens when your mind starts to go and you forget to pay bills or take medication? When your mind starts to go. Not if, when." Sarah was already planning for my mental decline as if it were inevitable. "My mind is fine, for now, but these things can change quickly. Wouldn't it be better to plan ahead while you still can make rational decisions?" Rational decisions. Like agreeing to be warehoused in a facility so they could sell my home. "I've made my decision. It's staying here." "Well, if you change your mind, the offer at Sunset Manor is still available. For now." Sunset Manor. Even the name sounded like a place people went to die. After that conversation, I realized they were never going to stop. They were going to keep pressuring and manipulating and building their case until they found a way to force me out of my home and into a situation where they could control my assets. But I had advantages they didn't know about. I had $50 million and a team of lawyers who worked for me instead of against me. It was time to use both. I called Ellen Morrison and asked her to prepare a comprehensive legal defense of my autonomy. Power of attorney documents that specifically excluded Michael and Sarah. A will that left everything to charity if anyone contested my mental competency. Medical directives that required multiple independent evaluations before anyone could make decisions for me. "I want to make it legally impossible for them to control me," I said. "We can do that," Ellen said. "But are you prepared for the family fallout? This kind of legal maneuvering tends to create permanent rifts." "The rift already exists," I said. "I'm just making it official." On Thanksgiving Day, I was invited to dinner at Michael and Sarah's house. The invitation felt like a trap, but I decided to go. I wanted to see if they would treat me differently now that their attempts to control me had failed. The dinner was a performance. Sarah had prepared an elaborate meal and decorated the house beautifully. Emma and Thomas were dressed in their best clothes. Michael carved the turkey with ceremony and made a speech about family and gratitude. And through it all, I could see the calculation in their eyes, the way they watched my reactions, looking for signs of confusion or weakness they could use against me, the way they steered conversations toward my health and living situation and future plans. "Mom," Michael said as we were having dessert, "Sarah and I have been talking. Even if you don't want to move to Sunset Manor, maybe we could arrange for someone to check on you more regularly. A home health aide or a housekeeper. Someone who could help with cleaning and cooking and make sure you're taking your medication properly. Someone who would report back to them on my daily activities and mental state. Someone who would be in my home regularly, documenting my behavior for their eventual competency hearing. I don't need help with cleaning or cooking or medication management. But it would give us peace of mind, Sarah added. Just knowing that someone was there if you needed anything. Someone was already there if I needed anything. Carmen checked on me every day. Dr. Rodriguez monitored my health. I had a support system that actually supported me instead of surveilling me. No thank you. The atmosphere in the room shifted. I could feel their frustration and impatience. This was supposed to be the conversation where they convinced me to accept their help, where they made progress toward their ultimate goal of controlling my life. Instead, I was still saying no. You know what, Mom? Michael said, his voice taking on an edge I recognized from his childhood tantrums. We're trying to help you, and you're making it impossible. We can't force you to accept our care, but don't expect us to keep worrying about you when you won't let us do anything. I don't expect you to worry about me. Well, good, because we're done. If you have an emergency, call 911. If you need help with something, hire a professional. If you want to see your grandchildren, you can call and ask like anyone else. He was punishing me for refusing to cooperate with their plans, withdrawing his presence and my access to my grandchildren because I wouldn't submit to their control. Is that what you want? I asked Emma and Thomas, who had been listening to this conversation with confused faces. Do you not want to see Grandma anymore? We want to see you, Emma said. But Daddy says you're being mean to us. Mean to them. By refusing to give up my independence. By insisting on living my own life in my own home. I looked around the table at this family I had sacrificed everything for. At my son, who was using my grandchildren as weapons against me. At my daughter-in-law, who was calculating my net worth while carving turkey. At my grandchildren, who were being taught that love was conditional on compliance. I think I'll go home now, I said. I gathered my coat and purse while the family sat in tense silence. As I reached the door, Michael called after me. This is your choice, Mom. Remember that. When you're sitting alone in that apartment on Christmas, remember that you chose this. I drove home through the quiet streets of Queens, thinking about choice. Had I chosen this? Or had I simply refused to choose the alternative they were offering, which wasn't really a choice at all? At home, I made myself a cup of tea and sat in Harold's chair, looking at the family photos on my mantle. Pictures of birthdays and graduations and holidays when we were all genuinely happy together. When love wasn't a transaction and family wasn't a business arrangement. Those people in the photos felt like strangers now. That weekend, I made another choice. I decided to use my lottery winnings for something I had always dreamed of but never thought I could afford. I booked a trip to Europe, Paris and Rome and Barcelona, all the places Harold and I had planned to visit when we retired. I would go alone, but I wouldn't be lonely. For the first time in years, I would be free. The process of planning the trip was exhilarating. First-class flights and luxury hotels and guided tours of museums I had only seen in pictures. I bought new clothes, elegant dresses and comfortable walking shoes, and a beautiful leather suitcase. I didn't tell Michael and Sarah about the trip. Let them wonder where I was when they called to check on my mental state. The travel agent I worked with was confused by my ability to pay for such an expensive trip in cash. I could see her trying to reconcile my modest apartment and simple clothes with my apparent wealth. But she didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer explanations. A few days before my departure, Carmen asked how I could afford such a lavish vacation. I told you, I said with a smile. I won the lottery. She laughed, thinking I was joking. I let her think that. The morning I left for the airport, I felt lighter than I had in years. I was 73 years old. And I was about to see the world, not as someone's burden or obligation, but as a free woman with unlimited possibilities. The trip was everything I had dreamed it would be. I stood in the Louvre and saw the Mona Lisa's actual smile. I threw a coin in the Trevi fountain and made a wish for continued independence. I walked through the Sagrada Familia and felt closer to God than I had since Harold died. I sent postcards to Carmen, but not to Michael. Let him wonder where his mentally incompetent mother had disappeared to. When I returned to New York 2 weeks later, I found 17 voicemail messages on my phone, 12 from Michael, 3 from Sarah, and 2 from the building management company. Michael's messages started concerned and escalated to frantic. Where was I? Why wasn't I answering my phone? Had I had an emergency? Did I need help? The later messages were angry. How could I disappear without telling anyone? What if something had happened to me? How were they supposed to know if I was safe? The building manager had called because Michael had contacted them, demanding they do a welfare check on my apartment. He was preparing to file a missing persons report, he told them. His mother was mentally unstable and might have wandered off, or worse. Sarah's messages were more calculating. She suggested that my disappearance proved I was having cognitive issues. People with dementia often wandered away from home, she said. This incident would be important evidence if they needed to pursue guardianship proceedings. Guardianship proceedings. They were going to try to have me declared legally incompetent so they could control my life entirely. I called Michael back, and he answered on the first ring. Mom, where have you been? We've been worried sick. I went on vacation. Vacation? What vacation? You didn't tell anyone you were planning a trip. I didn't realize I needed permission. You don't need permission, but you need to tell someone where you're going. What if there had been an emergency? What if we needed to reach you? What kind of emergency? Any kind of emergency. What if one of the kids got hurt? What if there was a fire in your building? What if you had gotten sick while you were traveling? All hypothetical emergencies designed to justify his need to monitor my movements. The kids are fine. The building is fine. And I didn't get sick. That's not the point. The point is that you can't just disappear like that. It's not normal behavior for someone your age. Not normal behavior. Everything I did was being evaluated for normalcy now. Where did you go? Sarah's voice in the background. Europe, I said. There was a long pause. I could almost hear them calculating how much such a trip would cost and wondering where I had gotten the money. Europe? Michael said finally. Mom, how did you pay for a trip to Europe? That must have cost thousands of dollars. I saved up. You saved up? Mom, you barely have enough money for groceries. How could you have saved up for a European vacation? They thought I barely had enough money for groceries because they had been monitoring my old bank account, which I had closed months ago. They had no idea about the new accounts or the lottery winnings or the fact that I was now wealthier than they would ever be. I managed. This doesn't make sense. Something's not right here. People don't just suddenly have money for expensive vacations. Are you sure you didn't get scammed? Are you sure someone didn't take advantage of you? They couldn't conceive of a scenario where I had money that they didn't know about. In their minds, I was a person with limited resources who needed their supervision to avoid being exploited. I'm sure. We're coming over. We need to talk about this in person. No, you're not. I'm tired from traveling and I want to rest. Mom, this behavior is really concerning. Disappearing without telling anyone, spending money you don't have, refusing to see your family. These are all signs that something is wrong. Signs that something is wrong. Or signs that I was finally living my own life. The only thing wrong is this conversation. I'm hanging up now. Don't you dare hang up on me. I hung up. They didn't come over that day, but I knew they would eventually. I spent the afternoon going through the photographs I had taken in Europe, remembering the feeling of walking through ancient cities as a free woman. I had been happy there, genuinely happy for the first time since Harold died. I wanted to hold on to that feeling. 2 days later, Michael and Sarah arrived with a man I didn't recognize. Middle-aged, wearing a suit, carrying a briefcase. Mom, this is Dr. Patterson, Michael said when I answered the door. We asked him to come talk to you about some concerns we have. Dr. Patterson was a psychiatrist. They had brought a psychiatrist to my home to evaluate my mental state. I don't need to talk to a psychiatrist. Mrs. Martinez, Dr. Patterson said in a voice that was probably meant to be soothing, your family is worried about you. They've described some behaviors that suggest you might benefit from a mental health evaluation. What behaviors? Sudden changes in financial habit, impulsive travel, social isolation, refusing help from family members. Social isolation, meaning I had refused to let them control my life. Those aren't symptoms of mental illness. Those are symptoms of independence. Sometimes the line between independence and poor judgment can be difficult to distinguish, especially as we age. Everyone was obsessed with my age, as if turning 73 had automatically made me incompetent. I'm not interested in an evaluation. Mom, please just talk to Dr. Patterson for a few minutes, Sarah said. What could it hurt? It could hurt a lot. If Dr. Patterson declared me mentally incompetent, Michael and Sarah could use that evaluation to pursue guardianship. They could have me removed from my home and placed in a facility. They could take control of my finances and my person. I said no. Mrs. Martinez, Dr. Patterson said, I understand you might feel defensive, but refusing a mental health evaluation could itself be seen as evidence of impaired judgment. A perfect trap. Agreeing to the evaluation could result in a diagnosis that would justify their plans. Refusing the evaluation could be used as evidence that I was too mentally impaired to make rational decisions about my own care. I have my own doctor, I said. If I need a psychiatric evaluation, I'll ask her for a referral. Doctor Rodriguez is your primary care physician, Michael said. She's not qualified to assess mental health issues. Then I'll find my own psychiatrist. Mom, we're trying to help you. Why are you making this so difficult? Because they weren't trying to help me. They were trying to control me. There was a difference even if they couldn't see it. Please leave, I said. All of you. After they left, I called Ellen Morrison and described what had happened. They're escalating, Ellen said. Bringing a psychiatrist to your home without your consent is a serious step. It suggests they're preparing to file for guardianship soon. Can they do that? They can try. But your documented mental competency makes it very difficult. Dr. Rodriguez's evaluation, the psychiatrist I referred you to, your ability to manage complex financial affairs, it all works in your favor. Complex financial affairs. Like managing $50 million without their knowledge. What should I do? Keep documenting everything, and be prepared for them to challenge your competency in court if they think they can win. That evening, I sat down and wrote a letter I never intended to send. A letter to Michael, explaining everything. About the lottery ticket and the money and the choice I had made to keep it secret. About wanting to know if he loved me or just my potential inheritance. About the pain of discovering that my own son was counting on my death to improve his financial situation. I wrote about all the years I had sacrificed for him, all the ways I had put his needs before my own, all the love I had given freely without expecting anything in return except basic respect and affection. I wrote about how it felt to be treated as a burden instead of a person, as a problem to be solved instead of a mother to be valued. I wrote until my hand ached and my eyes burned with tears. Then I folded the letter and put it in my jewelry box next to the lottery ticket, which I still hadn't claimed. 2 more weeks passed. Michael called occasionally, but our conversations were brief and cold. Sarah didn't call at all. I didn't see my grandchildren. I spent Christmas alone, which should have been sad but somehow felt peaceful. Carmen invited me to her family dinner, and I went gratefully. Surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, I remembered what a loving family looked like. One of Carmen's daughters asked why I was alone on Christmas. My family is busy, I said, not wanting to explain the whole complicated truth. Family is never too busy for Christmas, she said with the certainty of someone who had never been abandoned by the people who were supposed to love her most. In January, Michael called with what he presented as good news. He had found another assisted living facility, one closer to their house so they could visit more often. We really think this is the best solution, Mom. You'll have your own apartment, but there will be people around to help if you need anything, and we'll be able to see you every week. Every week. As if seeing me once a week was generous rather than the bare minimum of filial obligation. I'm not moving to a facility. Mom, you can't live alone forever. What happened to Mrs. Chen down the hall should be a wake-up call. Mrs. Chen was an elderly woman who had fallen in her apartment and hadn't been found for 2 days. She was fine, but the incident had become Michael's new evidence that I was in danger living alone. Mrs. Chen is 89 and has mobility issues. I'm 73 and in good health. You're 73 with diabetes and high blood pressure. And you're showing signs of cognitive decline. What signs? The impulsive travel, the financial secrecy, the social isolation, the paranoid behavior toward family members who are trying to help. Paranoid behavior. My refusal to cooperate with their plans had become paranoia. I'm not paranoid. I'm cautious. Mom, please just look at the facility. Springdale Gardens. It's beautiful. They have art classes and book clubs and social activities. You might actually enjoy it. Art classes and book clubs. They were trying to sell me on my own imprisonment by advertising the recreational activities. I have art classes and book clubs here, at the community center and the library. But you don't go to them? How do you know what I go to? There was a pause. Michael had revealed more than he intended. They were monitoring my activities somehow. Probably talking to my neighbors or the building management or finding other ways to keep track of my daily routine. We worry about you, that's all. Stop worrying. I'm fine. But I wasn't fine. I was tired. Tired of fighting for the right to live my own life. Tired of being treated like a child by my own child. Tired of having my every decision questioned and my every action evaluated for signs of incompetence. Maybe it would be easier to just give in, to let them put me in Springdale Gardens with its art classes and social activities and staff members who would make sure I took my medication on time, to stop fighting for an independence that seemed to cause everyone so much distress. But then I thought about the lottery ticket in my jewelry box, about the $50 million that represented not just financial security, but the power to determine my own fate. I was rich. Richer than Michael and Sarah could even imagine. I could hire private nurses if I needed medical care. I could pay for housekeeping and meal delivery and any other services that might make living alone easier. I could afford to live exactly the way I wanted to live for the rest of my life. But more than that, I was free. Free from depending on people who saw me as a burden. Free from accepting crumbs of attention from family members who were counting on my death. Free to discover who I really was when I wasn't defined by my usefulness to others. That realization gave me strength for what I needed to do next. In February, I made an appointment with Michael and Sarah. Not at my apartment, where they might try to pressure me or evaluate my living conditions. At Ellen Morrison's law office, where we would meet on neutral ground with legal witnesses. We need to have a conversation about boundaries, I told them when they arrived. Ellen was there, along with a court reporter who would document everything we said. Michael and Sarah looked uncomfortable in the formal legal setting, but I felt empowered by it. I want to make some things clear, I said. I am not moving to an assisted living facility. I am not signing papers that give you control over my finances or medical care. I am not accepting home health aides or housekeepers or any other forms of supervision that you think I need. Mom, Michael started, but Ellen held up a hand to stop him. Let her finish, Ellen said. I am mentally competent, physically capable, and financially secure. I have legal representation, medical advocacy, and a support system that respects my autonomy. Any attempt to have me declared incompetent will be vigorously contested. Financially secure? Sarah said. What does that mean? Where is this money coming from? I looked at them both. These people who had spent months trying to control me because they thought I was poor and helpless, who had pressured and manipulated and threatened me because they believed I had no options. I won the lottery, I said. The silence in the room was complete. Michael's face went through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, calculation, and then something that looked like rage. You won the lottery? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. $50 million, 7 months ago. The night after I sent you a text asking about dinner and you didn't reply. $50 million. Michael was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. And you didn't tell us? I wanted to see who you really were when you thought I had nothing. Who we really were. Sarah's voice was rising. We were people who were worried about our mother's welfare. You were people who were planning my future without consulting me. People who were pressuring me to sign away my rights because you thought I had no choice. People who brought psychiatrists to my home and threatened guardianship proceedings because I refused to cooperate with your plans. We were trying to take care of you, Michael shouted. No, you weren't. You were trying to take care of yourselves. You were counting on my death to solve your financial problems. That's not true. I heard you discussing my net worth. I saw the papers you wanted me to sign. I watched you calculate the value of my apartment and my insurance policies. The court reporter was documenting every word. This conversation would become part of the legal record. Evidence that I was not the confused, paranoid woman they had portrayed me as. So what now? Sarah asked. You're rich, so you don't need your family anymore? The pain in her voice might have been convincing if I hadn't spent months watching her manipulate me with fake concern and emotional blackmail. I've never needed you to control me, I said. I've only ever needed you to love. We do love you. No, you don't. You love what you thought you could get from me. When you thought that was $20,000 in an apartment in Queens, you were willing to warehouse me in a facility to get it. Now that you know it's $50 million, I'm sure you have different plans. Michael leaned forward, his face intense with an emotion I couldn't identify. Mom, this changes everything. We can help you manage this kind of money. We can make investments, set up trusts, make sure you're protected from people who might try to take advantage of you. People like you? We're your family. Being family doesn't give you the right to exploit me. Sarah was crying now. Real tears that seemed to come from genuine distress. But I had learned not to trust tears from people who had manipulated me for so long. I can't believe you would do this to us, she said. Put us through months of worry. Let us think you were struggling financially. Watch us try to help and then accuse us of trying to hurt you. You weren't trying to help me. You were trying to help yourselves. Ellen spoke for the first time since we'd started. I think Mrs. Martinez has made her position clear. She's not interested in giving you control over her finances or her person. This meeting is to establish legal boundaries that you're expected to respect. What kind of boundaries? Michael asked. No more attempts to have her declared incompetent. No more pressure to move out of her apartment. No more uninvited visits or welfare checks or psychiatric evaluations. You can have a relationship with your mother, but it has to be based on mutual respect rather than your desire to control her. And if we don't agree to these boundaries, Sarah asked, then you won't have a relationship with her at all, Ellen said. I looked at my son and his wife. These people I had loved and sacrificed for and trusted with my heart. I could see them processing the new information, recalculating their approach, figuring out how to adapt their strategy to this changed situation. I need time to think about this, Michael said finally. Take all the time you need, I said. But understand that things can never go back to the way they were. I know who you are now. I know what you were willing to do to me when you thought I was powerless. That knowledge changes everything. After they left, Ellen and I sat in her office reviewing what had just happened. How do you feel? She asked. Free, I said. And sad, but mostly free. They'll probably try to repair the relationship now. $50 million is a powerful motivator for family reconciliation. I know. Will you let them? I thought about that question as I rode the subway home through the familiar tunnels of Queens. Would I let them back into my life now that they knew about the money? Would I pretend that their sudden renewed interest was genuine love rather than financial calculation? At home, I took the lottery ticket out of my jewelry box and looked at it one more time. Those 6 numbers had changed everything, but not in the way I had expected when I bought the ticket. They hadn't brought me happiness or freedom or love. They had brought me truth. The truth was that my son had been willing to sacrifice my autonomy for his financial gain. The truth was that my daughter-in-law had seen me as an obstacle to her family's prosperity. The truth was that the love I thought we shared had been conditional on my usefulness and their expectations of inheritance. Those were painful truths, but they were also liberating ones. I was no longer trapped in relationships based on false premises. I was no longer giving my heart to people who saw it as currency. I was free to discover what my life could look like when I lived it entirely for myself. The next morning, I called a travel agent and booked another trip, this time to Asia, Japan and Thailand and Vietnam, places I had never thought I would be brave enough to visit alone. I called Carmen and invited her to come with me. At 78, she had never been outside of New York except for brief visits to family in Puerto Rico. "Are you serious, mija?" she asked when I described the itinerary. "Completely serious. We could see temples and markets and gardens. We could eat food we've never tasted and meet people from completely different cultures. But the cost? Don't worry about the cost. I really did win the lottery, Carmen. And I want to share some of the winnings with someone I love." We left for Asia in April, 2 elderly women with matching suitcases and guidebooks, eager to see the world while we still could. In Tokyo, we got lost trying to navigate the subway system and ended up laughing like teenagers when we finally found our destination 3 hours later. In Bangkok, we ate street food that made us sweat and bought silk scarves that made us feel elegant. In Ho Chi Minh City, we visited museums and learned about history that textbooks had never taught us. For 3 weeks, I was not someone's mother or burden or financial opportunity. I was just Maria, a woman discovering that adventure was possible at any age. When we returned to New York, I found that Michael had called several times. His messages were different now. Warmer, more respectful, less demanding. "Hi, Mom. Just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. No pressure, just call me back when you get a chance. I love you. I love you." Words he had rarely spoken in recent years. But now that he knew about the money, they came easily. I didn't call him back immediately. I needed time to process the trip and think about what kind of relationship, if any, I wanted to have with my family going forward. Carmen and I met for coffee to look through the photographs we had taken. She was glowing with the satisfaction of someone who had discovered new parts of herself in foreign places. "Thank you, mija," she said. "That trip changed my life." "Mine too," I said. And it had. Not because of the places we had seen or the experiences we had shared, but because I had proven to myself that I could create my own happiness. That I didn't need my family's approval or presence to have a meaningful, fulfilling life. A few days later, I called Michael back. "Mom, I was starting to worry when you didn't call back. I was traveling again. Another trip? Where did you go this time?" "Asia, with Carmen." "That sounds amazing. I'd love to hear about it. Maybe we could have dinner and you could tell me about your travels." He was being careful, polite, respectful, the way he might speak to a wealthy stranger whose goodwill he wanted to earn. "I'd like that," I said. We met at a restaurant in Manhattan, neutral territory where neither of us would feel the need to perform or control. Michael looked older than I remembered, more tired. The stress of the past months had aged him. "You look good, Mom," he said. "Rested, happy." "I am happy. I'm glad. I owe you an apology. Several apologies, actually." I waited for him to continue. "I handled things badly after Dad died. I was worried about you, but I went about it all wrong. Instead of asking what you needed, I assumed I knew what was best. Instead of respecting your independence, I tried to take it away." It was a good apology, as far as apologies went. But it didn't address the fundamental issue, which was that he had been willing to sacrifice my freedom for his financial benefit. "Why?" I asked. "Why what? Why were you so determined to control my life? What were you afraid would happen if I made my own decisions?" Michael stared at his hands for a long moment before answering. "Honestly, I was afraid you'd die alone and I'd feel guilty for not doing enough. And I was afraid you'd get sick and the medical bills would eat up any inheritance you might leave behind." At least he was being honest now. "So you decided to solve both problems by putting me in a facility and taking control of my assets." When you put it like that, it sounds terrible. It was terrible. I know. I see that now. But at the time, it felt like being responsible, like being a good son. A good son would have asked what I wanted instead of deciding for me. You're right. We sat in silence for a few minutes, both of us processing decades of complicated family dynamics and recent months of conflict. What happens now? Michael asked finally. I don't know, I said honestly. I love you because you're my son, but I don't trust you anymore. Trust takes time to rebuild. What would I need to do to earn your trust back? It was a fair question, and I tried to give him a fair answer. Respect my autonomy. Accept my decisions even when you don't agree with them. Stop trying to manage my life and start trying to enjoy my company. I can do that. Can you? Even if I decide to spend my money in ways you think are foolish? Even if I choose to live alone in my apartment until I die? Even if I make decisions that don't benefit you or your children? Michael's face went through several expressions as he considered the reality of what I was asking. Could he really accept that I had the right to live my life entirely for myself? Could he love me without expecting anything in return? I'll try, he said finally. I can't promise I'll be perfect, but I'll try. It wasn't a perfect answer, but it was an honest one. Over the following months, we worked on rebuilding our relationship. Michael called regularly, but not to check on my mental state or push his agenda. He called to tell me about Emma's soccer games and Thomas's school projects. He invited me to family dinners, but accepted gracefully when I declined. He asked about my travels and seemed genuinely interested in my adventures. Sarah was slower to change. She was polite but distant, still processing the fact that the poor, struggling mother-in-law she had been planning to warehouse was actually richer than her parents. I could see her trying to figure out how to repair our relationship in a way that might benefit her family financially, but I wasn't interested in making it easy for her. Emma and Thomas were confused by the family dynamics, but happy to see Grandma looking healthier and happier. They didn't understand the financial complexities or the power struggles. They only knew that I brought them better gifts now and took them on more interesting outings. I used my lottery winnings carefully and deliberately. I donated large sums to organizations that supported elderly people who were being exploited by their families. I established a scholarship fund for students whose parents had sacrificed their own educations to provide for their children. I bought Carmen a new apartment in a safer neighborhood and paid for her granddaughter's medical school tuition. I also indulged myself in ways I had never imagined possible. I renovated my apartment, keeping its essential character but making it more comfortable and beautiful. I bought art and furniture and kitchen appliances that had seemed impossibly luxurious when I was living on Social Security. I hired a personal trainer and a nutritionist and took better care of my health than I had in years. But the most important thing I did with my lottery winnings was refuse to let them define my relationships. When friends and family members learned about my wealth, some of them suddenly became much more interested in spending time with me. I learned to distinguish between people who enjoyed my company and people who enjoyed my financial resources. The line wasn't always clear, and I made mistakes. I trusted people who disappointed me and suspected people who deserved better. But I learned to value my own judgment over other people's expectations. 1 year after the letter in Ellen Morrison's office, I invited Michael and Sarah to dinner at my apartment, not to reconcile completely, but to establish a new kind of relationship based on the truth about who we all really were. I cooked the pot roast Michael had always loved, using ingredients I could now afford to buy without worrying about the cost. The apartment smelled like the home it had been when he was growing up, when family dinners were about sharing love rather than negotiating power. This feels like old times, Michael said as we sat around my renovated dining table. It's not old times, I said. It's new times. We're different people now than we were a year ago. Better people? Sarah asked. Honest people, I said. That's not always the same thing as better, but it's more important. We talked about the children, about work, about current events, carefully avoiding the financial elephant in the room that would always be part of our dynamic now. I had money they wanted access to. They had children I wanted relationships with. We were all navigating the complicated intersection of love and self-interest that defines many family relationships. But there was one topic we couldn't avoid forever. Mom, Michael said as we were clearing the dishes, I want you to know that I don't expect anything from you. Financially, I mean. Whatever you do with your lottery winnings is your choice. It was the right thing to say, and I appreciated him saying it. But we both knew the situation was more complex than that. My wealth would always be a factor in our relationship, just as his children would always be leverage he held in negotiating access to my heart. I know, I said, and I want you to know that how I spend my money doesn't reflect how I feel about you. If I leave everything to charity when I die, it's not because I don't love you. It's because I've learned the difference between loving someone and feeling obligated to subsidize them. I understand. Did he? I wasn't sure. But understanding would have to develop over time, through our actions rather than our words. That evening, after they had gone home, I sat in Harold's chair and thought about the journey that had brought me to this place. A year ago, I had been a lonely, frightened woman who was being manipulated by her own family. I had felt powerless and invisible and worthless. Now I was rich and independent and free. I had friends who valued me for myself rather than my utility. I had experiences and memories that belonged entirely to me. I had learned to distinguish between loneliness and solitude, between being needed and being loved. The lottery ticket had given me more than money. It had given me the power to discover who I really was when I wasn't defined by other people's needs or expectations. I was Maria Martinez, 74 years old, resident of Queens, New York. I was a widow and a mother and a grandmother and a friend. I was a traveler and an art student and a woman who had learned to value her own company. I was not someone's burden or someone's retirement account or someone's obligation. I was not a problem to be solved or managed or warehoused for convenience. I was a person, a complete, complex, valuable person who deserved respect and autonomy and the right to make her own choices, even when those choices seemed foolish to other people. The lottery had taught me that lesson, but it was a lesson I would have needed to learn eventually, with or without $50 million. Because dignity isn't something you can purchase. It's something you claim for yourself, something you insist on, something you refuse to surrender no matter what anyone else thinks you should do. As I prepared for bed that night, I thought about the letter I had written to Michael months ago, the one that still sat in my jewelry box next to a lottery ticket I would never need to claim. Maybe someday I would give him that letter. Maybe someday he would understand the pain he had caused and the gift he had inadvertently given me by forcing me to choose between compliance and freedom. Or maybe not. Maybe some things were better left unsaid, better left as private truths between an old woman and her own heart. Either way, I was grateful. Grateful for the lottery ticket that had started this journey. Grateful for the family conflict that had forced me to discover my own strength. Grateful for the loneliness that had taught me the value of solitude. Grateful for the pain that had led to growth. Most of all, I was grateful for the chance to live my life entirely on my own terms, even if it had taken me 73 years to claim that right. The next morning, I woke up in my own bed, in my own apartment, surrounded by belongings I had chosen and paid for with my own money. I made coffee in my own kitchen and sat at my own table, reading a newspaper I had bought with my own funds. I was alone, but I was not lonely. I was independent, but I was not isolated. I was rich, but I was not defined by my wealth. I was simply, finally, myself. Outside my window, Queens was waking up. The city that had been my home for 40 years continued its endless cycle of life and work and hope and struggle. Soon, I would be part of that cycle again, walking to the grocery store or the library or the community center, living my life among neighbors who saw me as just another elderly woman going about her daily business. They didn't know I was rich. They didn't know my story of family betrayal and lottery winnings and hard-won independence. They saw me as I wanted to be seen, as a person living her life with dignity and purpose, regardless of her age or wealth or family complications. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything. 3 months later, Carmen and I were planning our next adventure, a riverboat cruise through the heart of America from New Orleans to Minneapolis, when my phone rang. It was Emma, now 15 and able to call me without her parents' supervision. "Grandma," she said, "I need to ask you about something." "What is it, sweetheart?" "Mom and Dad have been acting weird lately, having these quiet conversations that stop when I walk in the room. And they keep asking me questions about what I want to study in college and whether I think you're happy living alone." My heart sank. After a year of tentative progress, were Michael and Sarah returning to their old patterns? What kind of questions? Like, do I think you're safe in your apartment? Do I think you need more help with things? Whether I'd be sad if you moved somewhere with more people around? They were using my granddaughter to assess my mental state and living situation, turning a 15-year-old into a spy in whatever new campaign they were planning. What did you tell them? I told them you seem happier now than you've ever been. You travel and you have friends and you do interesting things. I told them I think you're fine. Thank you for that. But Grandma, are they planning something? Because it feels like they're planning something. Out of the mouths of teenagers. Emma had inherited her grandmother's intuition about people's hidden motives. I don't know, sweetie, but it doesn't matter what they're planning. I know what I'm planning, and that's to keep living my life exactly the way I choose to. Good, Emma said fiercely, because you deserve to be happy. And you are happy now, aren't you? Yes, I said, and realized it was completely true. I really am. That evening, I called Ellen Morrison and scheduled an appointment to review and update my legal documents. If Michael and Sarah were preparing another campaign to control my life, I needed to be prepared to defend my autonomy. But as I hung up the phone, I realized something had changed in me over the past year. I wasn't afraid of their schemes anymore. I had learned that I was stronger than their manipulations, richer than their greed, and more independent than their need to control me. Whatever they were planning, I would survive it. I would resist it. I would prevail. Because I had learned the most valuable lesson of my 74 years. That loving yourself is not selfish. That taking care of your own needs is not cruel. That insisting on respect is not unreasonable. I had learned that sometimes the greatest gift you can give your family is refusing to let them treat you badly. I had learned that money can't buy love, but it can buy freedom. And sometimes freedom is more valuable than love, especially when that love comes with conditions that diminish your humanity. I had learned that it's never too late to start living for yourself, even if other people find that choice inconvenient or incomprehensible. Most importantly, I had learned that I was not too old, too sick, too confused, or too dependent to determine my own fate. I was exactly old enough, wise enough, and strong enough to claim the life I deserved. The lottery ticket had been worth $50 million, but the lessons it taught me were priceless. As I sit here today, 2 years after that life-changing moment in my kitchen, I think about the woman I was and the woman I've become. The frightened, lonely, manipulated person who bought that lottery ticket on impulse has grown into someone I barely recognize but deeply respect. I won $50 million, but more importantly, I won my life back. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where family members treated you more like a financial asset than a person? Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and maintaining your dignity? Share your story in the comments below. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is tell the truth about our experiences, even when that truth is painful. And if this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Because every story of courage and independence deserves to be heard, and every person deserves to know they're not alone in their struggle for respect and autonomy. Thank you for listening to my heart. Thank you for understanding that sometimes love means setting boundaries, even with the people we care about most. And thank you for believing that it's never too late to start over, to demand better, to choose yourself. The lottery changed my bank account, but I changed my life. And that makes all the difference.